Okay, good morning everyone. This is Tom Doran with ABC Computers and welcome to today's webinar, Finding Hidden Cache in Your Inventory. I'm joined this morning by Andrew Bing and Kate Pinion from Lanham & Associates. Lanham has a long history with the NAV product since it was first in the U.S. They have a special focus in supply chain management. Andrew Bing will be our presenter today. And Andrew has an extensive background in helping companies improve their forecasting and procurement processes. And we hope that you're going to find this presentation exceedingly entertaining. Andrew never fails to impress. So Andrew, I'm going to make you the presenter and turn it over to you.
Thank you, Tom. I know I can live up to your expectations, but we'll just make sure that we do so. So I'm just going to start my PowerPoint presentation. And as Tom mentioned, Lanham Associates is specializing in supply chain environment and on our advanced forecasting and procurement product. So what I'm going to do is give you a PowerPoint presentation to discuss how to find your hidden cache and then actually show you some tool sets that we have. So in finding the hidden cache and solving pain points, most companies come to us looking to solve problems. And they're looking to find the information that can help them manage their inventory better. This normally means handling some of the pain points and points where inventory may be hidden in the areas of promotions, collaborative forecasts, brand new items, items you can't forecast, how to handle safety stock, how to handle a multi-branch environment. And that's where you may have more than one location holding your inventory. To do this, we really look at solving the puzzle. And the puzzle is really broken down into two separate parts. The first part of that puzzle is the forecast. How do we project what we believe are going to be our sales in the future? And then once we know that information and know what the requirements are going to be for our inventory in a specific location, how do we then manage that inventory in order to keep the inventory at the lowest possible levels while still achieving the customer service satisfaction levels that we need? So the way AFP goes around this and looks at this is we create the forecast. To create the forecast, we work off of the historical data. What has been sold in the past? For those of you that are currently on NAV, you have all of that information inside of what is called your item ledger entry table. For those of you that may be looking at NAV for the first time, this information can be generated and brought into NAV and brought into the advanced forecasting table set by just having 5 simple fields of information. So it's not a lot of data, and as long as we can extract those 5 pieces of information, we can build the historical data. Now, the historical data is everything that we've sold in the past, and very often we need to adjust that data. In other words, we need to cleanse it, take some information out of it. An example is if you have an overstocked position on an item and you sell that overstocked, you would not want to classify that as a product that you would want to replenish in those quantities. Excuse me. So what we do is we give the ability of making adjustments to this historical data in a number of ways. Excuse me while I just take a sip of water. One of them is you can actually, when you're using NAV and using AFP, mark the sales order to not use that history. And we also give abilities of adjusting it after the fact during analysis stage. We then supply 18 different formulas with the AFP system, and we go through a selection process of determining which formula is the best formula to use to create that forecast for the future. The way we do this is we test each formula against each location's data. So if we're running a multi-branch environment, we'll test it against each level of the data. And what we do is, for example, on June 1st, we went back and we tested Formula A against item 1 at location 1.
Okay, fabulous. So that should take care of it going forward in the future?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And so what we do is we test this for not only for the month of May and find out what the error percentage is, but we also test it for the month of April, the month of March, and the month of February, so that we do it for the last 4 months. And so by doing it for 4 months, we now have the last 4 months error percentage. We then find the error percentage in the middle, or what we call the median error percentage. And that then becomes the error percentage that gets used for that item, for that formula. And then we test the other 18 formulas. And now we have all 18 formulas error percentages. And then we can select the formula with the lowest error percentage. This happens automatically at the beginning of every month. And it also happens anytime during the month that any of the underlying data may be changed. So if you're running a multi-location environment and location 1 has been receiving its product from location 3, and then all of a sudden you say, no, location 1 is now going to receive its inventory from location 5, the system will automatically reproject all 3 locations and rebuild the forecast for all 3 locations. So this is the beginning of creating the forecast. We also know that the computer only can work based upon what historical information is there, what information it knows. And there's quite often things that the computer doesn't know. It doesn't know that one of your customers is opening 10 new stores, and you need to increase your forecast for that. If you're working in products that are weather-related, such as we have water bottling companies, that will then adjust their forecast based upon what the projected weather is, so that if it's going to be hotter, they know they have to bottle more. So we give the ability of making adjustments at the location level. So in other words, each item at each location can be manually adjusted at that location level. Or we also can run a report that allows you to adjust the forecast of a whole group of items by a percentage, and that percentage could be up or down, as long as you can do what is called filtering. And NAV has a function in it called filtering, which allows you to select a certain group of records and then look at only that information. So using the NAV filtering functionality allows us to make adjustments in that manner. We also create something called a forecast summary. And this is where you can group like items together based upon parameters that are set on the item card. We can use the base functionality of NAV called inventory posting groups, item category code, product group code. We also in AFP add 3 new summary fields. That one of them you might use to be brand or product grouping or something of that nature, so that you could then group and see a summary where you could see a total level, maybe by location, maybe by group, and adjust that total level and let it ripple down to all of the items underneath if you want, so that this can be an increase or a decrease, and let this forecast summary roll into the forecast. This forecast summary can be just a what-if scenario, or you could let it ripple all the way down and let it actually adjust the forecast, and then adjust what you're actually going to need in each location. This forecast summary can also be seen in quantity, or it can be seen in cost dollars, using what NAV calls the last direct cost, or it can be seen in selling price dollars, using the list price value that's on the item card. So we can see this and use this for projections, or use it as the beginning point for some budgeting. We're not a budgeting tool. We're not a sales forecast for budget tool, but this forecast summary gives you that as a beginning starting point. One of the other major areas to help work with customers and to find that hidden inventory is what's called collaborative forecasting. This is where you may want to work with a client to work together and come up with a value or a quantity of what that customer projects they're going to buy from you in the future. This can be worked in a number of different ways. It can be done where your customer may simply send you that information and you enter that information. Or it can be using the AFP tools to actually create a forecast based just upon this customer's data, just against a few of the items. You'll notice that the arrow goes back to the historical data as well as going forward into the forecast. This is because when you work historically or collaboratively with a customer, you want the ability of marking their history not to use in part of your normal statistical forecast. And so this gives us the ability of working collaboratively with a customer. The closer we can work with a customer and the more accurate we can get with the customer, the more accurate we can get in keeping our inventory levels down and at the right level to work with that customer and provide the satisfaction level that we're looking for that customer. The final way we work on the forecast is we also do sales promotion forecasting. This is where you want to look for and see what are the additional sales that are going to happen as a result of a promotion you may do in the future. And you need to make sure that you have the inventory on hand. We'll work in promotional forecast with the ability of just entering that promotional forecast or also calculating a promotional forecast so that you can calculate, oh, this may be a 30% bump in my normal sales, so I'm going to put in a 30% promotional forecast. And again, there's the arrow going back to the historical data, because quite often a promotion may occur as a one-time event, and it is not a repeatable and not going to happen at the same time for the same items. So this is the way AFP starts to find that first part of the puzzle, which is the forecast. So we pull together all of the information that generates the forecast so that we can have an accurate forecast. If we have an accurate forecast, we now have a projection of what inventory we're going to need at each location, and now you can then plan your inventory a lot better and bring your inventory in and allow you to work with your inventory. To do this, AFP looks at how does the inventory come to this location. So for each and every location that you may be selling or utilizing inventory in, if you're running a manufacturing facility, you may have a production facility that is separate from the selling facility. So we look at each location that works with inventory and says, how does the inventory come here? Because we then need to plan and make sure that we can have the inventory flowing and set all of the values that you need. So what we do is we specify how does it come here. It can come here via distribution, which is where you buy directly from the vendor and have the vendor ship it to that location. You can also, depending upon which version of NAV you might be running, and I'll be showing you NAV 2013 today, which utilizes assemblies. Prior to NAV 2013, it utilized something called kits. This is where you might, some people might call it a light manufacturing, or where you simply pull multiple products together and say these products are being shipped as one item. Then we also work fully with production if you're running NAV manufacturing, so that you can do all of the manufacturing process and make sure that you buy all of the components and keeping the safety stock levels as low as possible to find that hidden cache. If you can lower down your safety stocks and look at where do I need to put the safety stock? Is it just on the finished item? Is it on the finished item and on the components? How do I manage that safety stock is another way to find that hidden cache. And then finally, does this location receive the product from another location? So this is how we manage the inventory to say where does the inventory come from so that we can pull all of this together. So if we're doing what's called a kit or assembly item or a production item, what we do is we push the forecast, take the forecasted sales of these items and put them into what we call buckets. And in the case of my example that's shown here on the screen, we're putting it into 7-day increments. This is a parameter that can be set inside of AFP so that different companies can do it differently. And we look at what is the net expected inventory as of each one of those dates. So we come up with the expected inventory based upon the forecast, based upon everything else that's happening inside of NAV, and say, do I need to make any inventory in order to satisfy my needs? Here on the screen, you see that on January 1st, we don't need to make any. We still have enough in inventory. On January 8th, it's the same way. On January 15th, we now see that we need to make some product. If we're running production environment, we then have some parameters and abilities to group product together into production groupings so that we can make production orders or theoretical production orders for the future so that we can look at what is the overall demand at that time frame. The example we see here on the screen is we're pulling 14 days worth of demand into a single production order. So it would say you need to produce 55 units on the week of January 15th. It continues to go out as far out as we need to, and we set this as a parameter. And normally that parameter is set as far as the longest lead time of any component, because you're always wanting to project out as far out as you need to buy. So we look at these groupings and create what we call simulated production orders. If you're not running nav manufacturing, but just doing kits or assemblies, we look at each one of those 7-day increments and then look at, I want to theoretically create these kits or assemblies as of these dates. What components do I need as of that time frame? So it now tells me, the system now knows what components do I need, what information do I need for kits and assemblies or for production. So what AFP does next is it pushes that demand or that forecast of the components down to what's called the suggested order. At the same time, it pushes the demand of what is the requirements of anything that I need to buy. What products do I need to purchase and bring in? So we create what's called a suggested order. That is one suggested order per vendor per location. So if that same vendor supplies location A and location B, you would have 2 different suggested orders, one for each location, because it's potentially that you could have a different lead time from that same vendor for each location. Because if you have a location on the east coast of the U.S. and a location on the west coast of the U.S., and the vendor is located on the east coast, you're going to have a much shorter lead time getting to your east coast location than you will to your west coast location. We also look at, are there what's called vendor targets? When I'm buying from this vendor, do I have to meet certain minimums and certain requirements? So I look out there and I say, okay, what is my minimums that I need to meet? Do I need to fill a container if I'm buying from overseas? Do I need to fill a certain dollar amount? Also, to help manage the inventory, we will set on the procurement unit card what are called minimum order quantity and order multiple, so that if our vendor has any specific requirements about what they need to buy and purchase from them, so we have all of that information. All of this goes into the calculation of the suggested order. One of the other unique features of advanced forecasting and procurement is when we're getting ready to buy and we're looking at what do I need to buy from this vendor, we will also look and see, does any surplus inventory exist at any other location? So this is helping to find that hidden inventory, find that cache, and help you to determine, do I have excess inventory at another location? So instead of purchasing the inventory from the vendor, I could, in theory, transfer the product from that other location to my selling location that needs it. This is a buyer-involved process. The buyer gets to make this decision because they know how easy it is to move that particular product. Do I have a vehicle moving between those warehouses? What information is there? For example, we have a client of ours up in Canada that works in the irrigation environment, and they have business rules that they've established that says I can transfer within this geographic area, but then I can only transfer specific types of parts. They do not allow transfer of the pipe because the pipe is very bulky and big and has a large value in the cost of transportation. So they will not transfer the pipe. And all of this helps in setting up the business rules and working with the processes about how best to manage your inventory. Finally, the last step here is creating the purchase order. So this gives us the ability then directly from the suggested order and go and create that purchase order and do that directly from the suggested order. All of this together is based upon what's called lead time horizon. So what we do for each individual item that is purchased from a vendor, the system will calculate what's called lead time horizon. This is based upon adding 3 factors together. The first one is the lead time. What is the lead time that I wish to use for this item from this vendor for this location? So the lead time can either be the calculated lead time that the system will calculate for you. It can be a frozen lead time that you set just for that one particular item, or it can be the lead time that you might set as a frozen lead time for that entire vendor for this particular location. In conjunction with that, you also have something called review cycle. This is how often do you normally purchase from the vendor? Do you buy from this vendor every week? Do you buy from this vendor once a month? Then finally, the last piece of this puzzle of lead time horizon is the safety stock. How many days of safety stock? One of the best ways to help control your inventory levels and to to find that hidden cash is to lower down the safety stock days for each item. And because we allow the safety stock to be set item by item, you can have different safety stock levels for different items. And it's based upon number of days. So as your forecast actually changes, your amount of safety stock would also change, so that it's a fluid value that doesn't stay static, and it changes as your business changes. You also have the ability of changing this value on what we call the procurement unit card very easily. Inside of AFP, there's a function called mass modify. This allows us to change setup parameters on a whole group of items very quickly by, again, using that same nav filtering functionality. So I have the ability of filtering and finding this group of items and changing that value. So we also talked potentially about what we call branch replenishment. Some people call it distribution requirements planning. Some people call it hub and spoke. It's all different variations, but basically what it means is how can I manage my inventory well by supplying my lower level locations that don't potentially have enough demand to buy on their own to meet those minimum order requirements from our vendor, and bring that information in together. So on the screen here you see examples of two different types of replenishment path that might happen. The one on the left shows a multi-location environment, and it shows multi-levels down. We have some of our clients that have up to 20, 30, and 40 locations, and they will build a tree similar to this for the replenishment path. In the example on the left, warehouse number 9 will build its own forecast for its own requirements. That will then become a requirement of a transfer from warehouse 5. When we look at creating the forecast for warehouse 5, we'll look at what are their own sales, but we'll also roll up the sales of what happens in warehouse 9 so that it then becomes the aggregate of both amounts of usage to create a forecast of how much inventory needs to be at warehouse 5. And then it also then rolls up to warehouse 1 so that when we look at warehouse 1, it looks at the demands of what are being sold at warehouse 1 as well as what are the demands from 4, 5, 6, and 9. So all of this gets rolled up together when we look at buying at the top level into warehouse 1. On the right-hand side is a much similar or simpler environment of that, where you may only have 3 warehouses, 2 of them being supplied from the top level warehouse. This allows us to pull all of the information together, and the end result of this is then the calculation of surplus and excess. Because we look at each and every individual location, and on each what's called location card in AFP and in NAV, we have the ability of setting the value of when do we want to start to calculate surplus and when do we also want to calculate excess. So that we can look through our lead time horizon on this example, add what's called surplus pad days or add days, and say let's look beyond that time frame and say what is surplus, and then we have another value that says what is excess. As shown previously, this will show up on the suggested order, but it also shows up in the surplus and excess. The result of all of this is what's called the suggested order. So the buyer has the ability of seeing all of the information that's driving everything within the company so they can manage the inventory, help to find that hidden cash, find that information. So this is the end of the PowerPoint, and I presume by this time you guys are saying, when is he actually going to show us how NAV and how AFP works? So here is the AFP Role Center. This is NAV 2013 for NAV, and here is the Role Center of where the buyer spends their time. One of the biggest benefits of using AFP is coming into the alerts. This is where are my trouble items? What items are in trouble for me that I need to manage and I need to look at right away? So we shift the system with 5 different types of alerts. Here you can see the first one is called an expected stock out alert. This one is telling us, by the way, my system happens to be backdated, so it thinks it's February 2nd, 2014 down here. So because of that, it looks out into the future, and we're looking out in increments again. It's looking out and it's saying on April 5th, you're going to be out of stock by 12 units. There's not any values beyond that because that's then when the lead time horizon starts, so this item would show up on a suggested order. This item said we're actually going to be out of stock right away. And so right away today on February 2nd, we're out of stock. And then these numbers out here are further increments where we see we're looking further out. If we actually had an ending date here, that would tell me that I'm actually going to be back in the stock because I actually have a purchase coming in. We also here have an auto forecast adjust alert. This is where it's telling you that an item is selling faster than you projected. So now you may want to look at that item early because you're starting to pull some of the inventory that's out there. We also have an alert, the sample that I don't happen to have on the screen, called surplus with open PO. That's an alert where it's telling you that, oh, this item you already have too much inventory and you're already scheduled to buy it. So let's look at that item. That's one of the functions and features that you can use to help define that inventory. The other place that the buyers spend the majority of their time is what's called the buying calendar. This is a listing of each vendor that I need to buy from for each one of my locations. And here you can see that it says there's a suggested order in existence, and it says that you need to buy 10 items. If I click the suggested order button, this opens up and then shows you the details on all the items that you need to buy. And so here, it's telling you that in this case, on this item, the economic order quantity, or the quantity based upon the cost of money that it would suggest you buy, is 157 units. But here it's telling you to buy 160. This one, it didn't come up with an economic order quantity at all because it didn't qualify for EOQ, but it's telling you to buy 110 units. So the question comes, how did the system come up with these information? What did the system do to help you manage that inventory? So right here on the right, we have access to all of this information, everything that it tells you about that item. So if we click the Forecast View button, this will open up the forecast for us. This shows us what are the projections of what we think we're going to sell in the future. This is our forecast here. This would be any adjustments, any customer collaborative forecast, any demand we might have, which is our open sales orders, any that we've already shipped and our balance of our forecast. And then down here, we get to see below that what inventory do we have on hand, what ending inventory do we expect, and how much do we need to buy. So here you see the system is telling us to buy that quantity. And here, I can look and it said, I need to buy 160. So if I look at my calculation lines, here what it's going to say is my actual need is 39 units. That was rounded to 40 because I set order multiples of 10, but I'm also calculating my economic order quantity. And economic order quantity says what is the best quantity to handle for this item. In other words, to keep the cost down of creating my orders. I want to order less frequently because that costs money every time I create a PO. I also want to handle it less times in the warehouse. So what would the economic order quantity be? And this is based upon my carrying cost and my ordering cost, which are parameters that can be set in the system by location. And in this case, it came up with 157 units. The system is configured currently to buy whichever of these two is greater. So in this case, I only needed 39 for actual. I'm buying 157 by EOQ, so it said buy the 157 of EOQ, and again, it increased to the order multiple so that I would do that the best way. And that's how it came up with 160 units. And so there it always tells you that information. Now, if this item is being used by lower level locations, we also want to know what is happening at that lower level. So here we have the location roll-up screen. And this then shows me through my horizon date, because that's how far out in the future I need to buy based upon the setup, all of the demands for all of the other locations. So here I can see the forecast at each level, plus the rolled up forecast, plus the previous level forecast, meaning the addition of all of these forecasts for the previous level. And then here I can see what is the forecast for my individual location. And then here, over to the right, I can look at and see what transfers do I need and what surplus inventory might I have at the other locations. Now, depending upon how you configure the system, you'll notice down here that there's something called min SOQ, which is minimum suggested order quantity, and max SOQ. You can set the system up to order based upon either one of these two levels that you might want. If you set it up to do min, it assumes you're going to transfer the extra inventory back from those other locations. So if your locations are actually just virtual locations, meaning they're all in the same building or something within the same area, you can automatically have the system calculate the surplus for you and take the surplus into consideration when buying. Again, finding that hidden cash in your inventory. Sorry, I hit the button too far out. Also, the system will tell you if you have surplus inventory. So I have surplus on this particular item. I can see it here in the surplus inventory value, and I can also see it over here in surplus available. Either one of these will open up the surplus window, and this will show me the additional inventory that exists at other locations, and then I can fill in the quantity to transfer. This is finding that hidden cash, finding that information inside of your system. What do I need to do to manage my inventory better? And so it brings in together all of this information, brings everything together so that I see it here on one screen, making it very easy for my buyer or my purchasing person, however I title them, to look at all of the information of what do I need to do for each one of these items. So I can go through and look at each one of these items. Now this item you'll notice here, this one says lead time horizon. That means that item has a forecast. So here, this item is called a target stock level item. That means that item doesn't have a forecast. So what AFP does is it says we know that some items may not have enough data to do a forecast. So at that point, to try and help you find the hidden value, we'll do something called target stock level. Based upon something in the system called sporadic rule, we will calculate a quantity that we suggest you keep on hand to meet the requirements of your customers, as well as keeping your inventory at the lowest possible levels. So you can have multiple different sporadic rules. Besides doing the sporadic rules for those items that don't have enough data to do a forecast, you also can do something called redirect of usage. This is where if one item gets replaced by another item, I can then move the history without touching anything in inventory, but just move the history for forecasting over to that new item. We also allow that redirect of usage to work by location, so that if you have a customer that has normally been serviced by location A, but now you're building a warehouse closer to that customer, and you call that location B, you can actually move all of the history to location B and start to do a forecast into location B right away based upon the sales history of that customer. You also can redirect by individual items by customer. So if you have a customer that maybe says they want their logo put on one of your products, and that customer is a large customer such as Walmart or Costco or somebody of that nature, you can actually just move the history of that one item for that one customer. Also, one of the other things that you can do for new items is to do something called cloning of history. All of these will bring down the number of target stock items that you might have. And in this case, the system is saying that the EOQ quantity is telling you to buy 21 units. So even though EOQ is higher, it's telling you to buy a lower quantity because we're only wanting to keep that minimum so that we set those values for you. Also, further down here, you'll notice that we have items that say no usage negative. These are items that are components. So here, if I look at the forecast view, I'll notice that there is no selling forecast for this item. So I don't sell this item on its own. But what if I look down further on my forecast screen, I'll see here in the line of assembly and production components, here I can see the requirements for this item's use as a component in a production item. And if I drill into this and look at it here, I can actually drill into and see the exact simulated production order that looks at and go through and look at where exactly is this item needed. So the system will help you to manage the inventory. And in order to do this and look at this, you then look at setting the safety stock levels. So on the procurement unit card, is where we can establish the safety stock levels in number of days for each one of our items. Here you can see that this is a component item, and I've elected to set the safety stock at 0, because in order to manage and find that hidden cache for this item, in this system I've set where I'm carrying the safety stock on the finished item. So I would much rather have the finished item in stock a certain number of days extra and not have any components in stock. I can also split this if I want, depending upon how I might want to do my setup. What might I want to pull together in order to set the safety stock at the proper levels? And this is done by analysis, working with your consultant on how are you going to set up AFP. What works best for you in your company in setting up advanced forecasting and procurement. So this is the suggested order function. When the buyer gets ready to look in here and look at this, if they've elected to transfer any product and to do that as a transfer quantity, they can hit this Create Transfer button, and it'll automatically create the transfer order. They also, if they want to buy it from a different vendor, in this one particular case, can choose the override vendor and select a different vendor for this one purchase. Whichever way they then elect to buy the purchase, they can hit this Create Purchase Order button, and in one little push of the button, it will now create that purchase order. So it now goes through and creates that purchase order. And if I now look at the open purchase orders, and I look at this last one right here, and I choose Edit, this is that purchase order that just got created from that suggested order. And here you can see the quantities from AFP being driven directly to this suggested order, or to this purchase order. We track all the information on this. So actually here we can see on the procurement tab that we know from what suggested order that came from. So we always can go back to the history, look back at what happened in the past. So if I come back here and I look at my posted suggested orders, and I look back here, there's that same posted suggested order. And if I click the Edit button or View button on it, I get to see all of the information that's there. And if I also want to look at what was the calculation lines at that point in time, I can see exactly what the system told me to buy back at that time frame. So I always can look back and see exactly what was going on at the time I created that suggested order. So these are the ways that we start to help you in finding the information and looking at all of the other information. Here also we have all other stacks of information that will help you in your workflow to manage your inventory. This stack right here is called the transfer calendar, so that if I want to look and see what are my transfers that I need to do, right here I simply come through and I say, okay, I need to create a transfer, so then there I'm going to create one for that one particular transfer. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new transfer for this one, and I'm going through the allocation of the inventory process to look and to see what is the inventory requirement that I have, and I'm going to look at the suggested transfer order. And now if I click the Edit button, here it's showing me this is what you project you need to transfer. So here you can see that the system is saying I need 74 units, but it's actually only allowing a transfer of 14, because I may need 74, but I only have 14 available to transfer because I still need to meet the requirements of my other locations. And right here under this button, you can hit the line button again, and now again you can see all of the information that helps you in making the decisions. Do you potentially want to override this information? Do you want to pull additional information together and make the decision of your own? Because you always can override this quantity. So here, this one is telling you you can't transfer any. So if you determined that there was enough, you could actually override and choose to transfer that quantity. All of this is there for you, and then under the Actions button, you have the ability of creating that transfer document. So all of these pieces give you the ability of managing your inventory, pulling all of the inventory together. There's a lot more features and functions inside of AFP, but I've been talking for quite a long time now without hearing if there are any questions and anything else that might be there. So I'm going to ask Tom to open it up to see if there's questions of where people might have additional questions and want to know some things.
I've unmuted everyone, so if you have questions.
Free fountain.
Questions? Okay.
That means I did an excellent job. Thank you. So if there are no questions, what I would like to do is then talk about a couple of the other features and functions. One of them that we talked about briefly in the PowerPoint was the customer collaborative forecasting. So here I clicked on Forecast Customers, and here's an example of a customer collaborative forecast. So here in this forecast screen, I have the ability of creating customer collaborative forecasts, and this happens to actually have one item only on it. I can, if I want to, use our function that says Create Forecast Customer Items. This will go and find every item that that customer purchased from you and then bring them onto this forecast screen for you. You also then can run the function of Create the Forecast. This will go out and look at this historical data just against this customer and create a theoretical forecast for you. You can then export that forecast, pushing it out to Excel, seeing what the forecast quantities are, and then you can actually bring that forecast back in so that you can look at the information. One of the side benefits that we didn't think of when we actually designed collaborative forecasting was what happens in the unfortunate circumstance where I might lose a customer, where I might need to look at pulling the data out for that customer. We had a client, I'm in the Northwest, by the way, we had a client up here in the Northwest that was selling to a very large drugstore chain. And the drugstore chain was working with regional distributors. The drugstore chain decided that they were going to go with a national distributor and stop buying from all the regional distributors. So our client, who was one of these regional distributors, simply created a collaborative forecast for that drugstore chain, listed all of the items that that customer had bought from them, put in a collaborative forecast of 0, and released it. At that point, it simply just removed all of the history of that customer. So now they were creating their forecasts as though they had not sold to that customer. So they had a slight drop in their sales a few years ago. Now it's about 3 years later, and they're now doing about 180% of what they were doing at that time frame. And now the system is operating properly with all of the information that's there. Also, in working with the same way, you may want to do a forecast to your vendor, because if your vendor has the information about what you're going to purchase in the future, they can better supply you, better hit the lead times, better pull that information together. So the same way we create a customer collaborative forecast, we can create a vendor forecast. This is the projection of what you're going to sell of the vendor's products in the future, taking into consideration all the inventory you already have on hand, plus all of the items that you already have on order from that vendor. So it's only still what you need to purchase. And you can create this by vendor. You can filter on certain items if you want, certain locations if you want, and you have the ability of exporting this vendor forecast out so that you can send it as an Excel file off to your customer. So all of these are ways to better manage your inventory, better pull in the information. We also talked a little bit about the promotional forecasting. So here is where I can establish a promotional forecast. And if I simply click the New button here to create one, and I'll just create one called Test, I can then create one called Test, and here I can give it a starting and ending date. So I can say that this collaborative forecast is going to be in the future, and I can come, or excuse me, promotional forecast, and I can say that this is going to start in May, and then it's going to end in the month of June. And so it's for 2 months. I can then list each one of the locations that I might be selling product in, and then I can put my item number in. When I click the button that's called Fill Dates, you'll notice that it creates one record for each item, for each location, for each time frame. I then have the ability of putting in the promotional quantity, where right here I can automatically just manually put that value in, or under the Actions button, I can calculate the promotion quantities. And if I click this Calculate Promotion Quantities, it says, okay, what percentage of the forecast do you want to use? So I could in here put 50% of my forecast, and then I could say I want to do it based upon the location forecast. Click OK. Now the system, if I would have hit the right button, under the Action button of Calculate, and I have to put my values back in. Sorry about that. called moving too fast sometimes. So now I'm calculating, and here you can see that the system now calculated that promotion quantity for you. So this will then, as soon as you hit this release button, right now become an additional forecast quantity that I then can see on these items. And if I click here on my line button again, I can actually go to the forecast, and now in the forecast here, I can see the additional quantity of 7 and the additional quantity of 13 as an adjustment to my forecast. And I also have the ability of going in and looking at it and drilling into it so I can see exactly where the information is coming from. So the system is always telling you what it's doing, always giving you access to everything that's around that you can look at. So we're now at 45 minutes past the hour, and I know that we were supposed to go about 50 minutes if my recollection, Tom, is correct. I'm not quite sure. So I want to open it back up and see if there's questions or things that you want to fill in, Tom, to finish out our presentation.
So for the attendees, we got a lot of feedback when I opened up all the mics, but if you have questions, type them into the chat, and I will make sure that Andrew has a chance to respond. So Andrew, I have one question here. So how does advanced forecasting work with the planning worksheet that is inherent in NAV?
If you're talking about the planning worksheet, we replace that planning worksheet. If you're talking about doing production and you actually still want to run MRP, you can take the forecast of the finished goods and send that to MRP and let MRP run. However, our functionality quite often replaces that.
Good. And I've got another question here. So let me make sure I'm reading this properly. So how long does it usually take to implement advanced forecasting?
So depending upon your company, the implementation process that someone is on site with you, working with you, is normally 3 to 5 days for training and setup. And then it normally takes, depending upon how you implement it, how large your company is, it takes anywhere from 30 to 90 days to get it fully up and running, depending upon how you might implement it. And by the 30 to 90 days, I mean the first 30 days is more difficult because you're going slower to learn the process and go through it. But then by the time 90 days is normally done, you're normally running it very smoothly and not having any slowdown in your processes.
And they have another question. It looks like deep integration with NAV. Is the product built for NAV, or does it work with other products?
It's built inside of NAV, so all of our products are inside of NAV. If you're running another ERP system, we do have a sister company that works outside of NAV.
Other questions from anyone? Okay, Andrew, I'm not seeing other questions. Do you have any last comments before we wrap up?
No, just that we appreciate your time today. I know I talk fast, and I hope that everybody was able to hear me okay and that the presentation went well and you gathered a lot of information from it. And please contact Tom or other people at ABC if you want additional information. We'll be more than glad to speak with anyone to go into more detail.
That's great. Andrew and Kate, thanks very much for your time today. For our attendees, this presentation will be recorded and available on our website by tomorrow morning. And so if you have other people in your organization that would like to see this presentation, you can send them to our website, and we'll have that for you. Thanks, everyone, for attending today, and we look forward to seeing you at our next presentation. Take care. Have a good day.